Good afternoon, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on the Coastal Salinity Index with a focus on the real-time gauge expansion across the Gulf of Mexico and Eastern Seaboard. We're really excited about this expansion. This webinar today is co-hosted by NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System and the U.S. Geological Survey. So the Coastal Salinity Index, also called CSI, is a long-term monitoring tool developed in 2017 to help users characterize and assess fluctuating salinity conditions in coastal areas due to events such as droughts and floods. My name is Meredith Muth. I am a regional coordinator with NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System, NIDIS, and your moderator for today. This webinar will describe the motivation for and the development of the CSI, including the expanded geographic footprint and key website features. So we'll get a little tour as we go. Number two, we'll be providing examples of how this tool can be applied to existing monitoring, decision-making, and field investigations. And three, share with you some next steps. We have four outstanding speakers today. Matt Petkowicz is a hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, South Atlantic Water Science Center. During his 30 years with the USGS, he has participated in a broad variety of water quality investigations related to surface and groundwater resources. Matt has been involved in enhancing the use and application of the CSI since 2018. Andrew Twol is a landscape ecologist at the Marine Resources Research Institute and the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources in Charleston, South Carolina. Andrew's research focus is on understanding linkages between environmental stressors and ecological response, particularly in the context of coastal development and changing climate. Christopher Swarzensky is a wetland hydrologist with the USGS Water Science Mission area in Baton Rouge. His research focus is on the exchange of surface water and shallow pore water and how water quality affects soil biogeochemical processes and the structure and function of wetland plant communities. And finally, we have Simeon Urich, who is a research ecologist with the USGS Wetland and Aquatic Research Center in Gainesville, Florida. His focal areas of research are spatial conservation planning and climate adaptation strategy for coastal and wetland reserve lands, including barrier islands, reef ecosystems, and the Everglades. We welcome all of you. We have an incredible variety of expertise here today. Now, after all of the presentations, we will open the webinar for your questions. So throughout the webinar, all participants are muted. If you have a question for any of our speakers, please write your question in the question box that is in your GoToMeeting control panel. If your question is specific to one speaker, it would be really helpful to note the name of the speaker in the question box. You may enter those questions anytime. At the close of the webinar, a survey will pop up. Please take a moment to answer a few brief questions to help provide us with feedback on improving the Coastal Salinity Index. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. Just really briefly, I wanted to provide a brief background on NIDIS, the National Integrated Drought Information System. This was a program created by congressional law in 2006 with a mandate to help the nation prepare for, mitigate, and respond to the effects of drought. We complete much of our work through our regional drought early warning systems, which are networks, regional networks, also known as DEWs. In fact, the idea and initial development of the Coastal Salinity Index came out of what was the Coastal Carolinas DEWs. Last year, the Coastal Carolina DEWs was integrated into a broader Southeast DEWs as shown to the map on your right. In addition, we also coordinate and support efforts to improve drought prediction, forecasting, monitoring, and collaborating with existing programs and partners to undertake applied resource and drought planning and preparedness. I encourage attendees of this webinar to explore the newly updated U.S. Drought portal at drought.gov. So with that, I will now turn controls over to Matt Petkowicz, who will be providing an overview of what the CSI is and recent improvements. So hold on, Matt, just for a moment. There you are.
Okay, Meredith, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Meredith. Good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned earlier, I'm Matt Pedowick, a hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey in the South Atlantic Water Science Center located in Columbia, South Carolina. Today, I'm going to describe the Coastal Salinity Index and the website that allows real-time monitoring of changing salinity conditions across the Gulf of Mexico and eastern seaboard. Funding for the Coastal Salinity Index has come from the USGS and NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS. The Coastal Salinity Index was developed and continues to expand due to a large group of collaborators, funding partners, and programs. This list acknowledges the numerous agencies and individuals that have contributed to the Coastal Salinity Index since conceptualization in 2012. The Coastal Salinity Index, also called the CSI, has evolved over the past 9 years. I won't be able to get into all the details of this slide, but we'll just use it to broadly define the milestones of CSI accomplishments, such as the motivation for a unique drought index conceptualized at the 2012 Coastal Carolinas Drought Early Warning System workshop. Over the next few years, the CSI was developed, and the methods and results were published in journal articles, reports, and web pages. In the next few slides, I'll describe the motivation and methods for the development of the CSI. I'll then describe the CSI website enhancements that took place in 2020 and also earlier this year. Later in today's presentations, the CSI team will describe application of the CSI to ecological investigations for projects that will be taking place this year and also into the next few years. So as described on the previous slides, 2012 stakeholders workshop identified the need for a tool to monitor salinity changes in coastal waters. They realized that key stressors associated with drought in coastal waters involves increasing salinity concentrations, the changing location of the freshwater saltwater interface, and reduced freshwater availability. These dynamics are complex and are affected by the interaction between upstream climate and hydrologic conditions and factors that contribute to fluctuating coastal marine water levels. Upstream conditions include precipitation, drought, tropical storms, stream flow regulation. Of course, marine water levels are affected by tides, winds, tropical storms, and sea level rise. So droughts and floods affect the location of the freshwater saltwater interface. This graphic in the middle shows how the interface will move towards the coast with high river discharge seen during flooding, or how the freshwater saltwater interface will move inland due to either high tides or low river discharge seen during drought. The location of this freshwater saltwater interface is important, and it affects freshwater availability, vegetation tolerance, and fisheries, among other things. Commonly used drought indices use many inputs for classifying drought, such as precipitation, stream flow, and soil moisture conditions. However, they don't include things that readily convey economic and ecological effects that have been observed and experienced by those who monitor and manage coastal resources. So that was the motivation for creating a unique index to characterize coastal drought. And to address this issue, the USGS took the lead on developing the Coastal Salinity Index, beginning with the quantitative analysis of long-term salinity records. So the CSI uses an approach similar to the standardized precipitation index to show the probability of recording a given amount of salinity at a gauge. Monthly mean salinity data are fit to a gamma distribution and normalized with a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. Index values are standard deviations from that normalized mean value. An index value of 0 reflects average salinity. Increasing negative and positive values reflect increasing saline and fresh conditions, respectively. This table on the right shows the CSI classifications and descriptions. The threshold value, similar to the standardized precipitation index, values of -2 to +2 were used to describe the classifications. CD stands for coastal drought and is shown in colors from yellow to dark red. CW stands for coastal wet or freshwater conditions, and is shown in colors from gray to dark blue. Now, for calculation purposes, the greater the number of years of data, the better. The standardized precipitation index uses greater than 30 years of precipitation data for their calculations. Because salinity records aren't generally as long as precipitation data, our CSI team is focused on sites with more than 16 years of salinity data for our CSI calculations. The CSI can be calculated for multiple time intervals to characterize short and long-term conditions. Here are 3 CSI graphs showing average salinity over time for a gauge located in the Gulf of Mexico near the Mississippi River. The y-axis on each graph shows monthly salinity values and practical salinity units. The x-axis shows time from in years from 1994 to 2021. The black line on the bottom graph shows 1 month running average of salinity over time. The one in the middle shows the 12-month average salinity over time. And up top, we have a 24-month average salinity over time. The vertical colors in the background of the graphs represent the average CSI values for those for 1, 12, and 24 months. So this is a 24-month running average color band for the CSI value in the background. High salinity values on these graphs show up with large negative thresholds, and these are the dark red colors. Low salinity values on the graph show up with the large positive thresholds, and these are the dark blue colors. So on this graph in the Gulf of Mexico, you can see that there was a drought in the 2000s, and this was due to real low stream flow in the Mississippi River. So less fresh water was getting out to the coast, and so salt water was able to come in and raise the salinity of this gauge. In recent years, you see low salinity values due to record stream flow from the Mississippi River. Another thing you can notice from these graphs is that the flashiness of the 1 month salinity records and the color bands in the background are averaged out over time for the 12-month and the 24-month intervals due to averaging. Here's a stacked graph. We use this as a visualization tool, which allows you to view short and long-term salinity conditions on a single graph. You can see short-time salinity conditions using the CSI color bands in the back across the bottom. So this is a 1 month CSI across the bottom, 12-month in the middle, and the color band up top is the 24-month CSI interval. There's a lot to digest on this figure. I'm not going to delve into the details in this short presentation, but I'll point you to a location on the website where this stack graph is described in detail. So with support from NIDIS, the USGS launched the first prototype website to display CSIs in 2019. The website consisted of only 17 gauges located in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. These were just USGS gauges. In 2020, our team received funding from the USGS Community for Data Integration. This group gave us money to update the website, and we had 3 main project objectives. The first one was to expand the number of real-time CSI gauges to allow this website to be used as a monitoring, forecasting, and a decision-making tool. For us to include those gauges, data had to be electronically available on a daily basis. It had to consist of greater than 16 years of data. The relatively short project duration allowed us to incorporate 130 gauges from Maine to Florida and over into Texas, and also in Puerto Rico. So 130 gauges, most of them were USGS gauges, but it also includes National Park Service gauges located in the Florida Everglades, and also National Estuary and Research Reserve systems throughout the East and Gulf and in Puerto Rico. The second objective was to enhance the existing website to accommodate the new CSIs, basically make it more user-friendly. And our third objective was to develop new CSI R scripts for use in ecological analyses. But today I'm just going to discuss the updated website. So here's the landing page for the Coastal Salinity Index website. Up top, you'll see we have 4 tabs associated with the website, which I'll go over briefly. Beneath the title banner, we have an introductory paragraph describing the Coastal Salinity Index. Beneath that is an interactive map from showing the gauges from Maine to Florida and to Texas, and also in Puerto Rico. Those are CSI gauges plotted there. The map allows you to change the background to different map types if you're interested. Over here on the right, we have the exclamation box. This shows you the CSI time interval that's plotted on the map. The default is 1 month CSI intervals, but you can choose 1, 2, 3, and up to a 24-month interval. When you change it, we'll change it to a 3-month CSI interval, and that shows a 3-month CSI on the map. And generally, you can see right now that typically throughout the East and the Gulf, we have wet conditions, the dark blue colors, and of course, in the Gulf, where we've had recent flooding, that's the reason for those wet conditions. Beneath the explanation box, we have the CSI table to describe the color range that's shown on the map. And beneath that, we have the operating agencies. USGS gauges are shown as circles. National Estuary Research Preserve systems are shown as squares. And the National Park Service gauges in South Florida are triangles. Beneath the map, we have the CSI gauge table, which we'll go over shortly. If we move in on the interactive map here to South Carolina, we click on a gauge of interest. Here we have, we click into this site. This is near station. It's called the St. Pierre station. And when this pop-up box shows the station name, station ID, agency, the current CSI value for the interval of choice. So the 1 month or 3 month CSI is shown here. If you additional pages here, if you click on this box, the view station page, it'll take you to the NIRS web page for that gauge. And on this page, which it looks like it's not populating, on this page you'll get to the raw agency data for that gauge. And it'll include the salinity data and also what other parameters are available for that gauge. For our purposes, we're not providing the raw data. We want the originating agencies to maintain that data, quality assured, and approve it and provide it to the users. So basically, all we're going to be providing is salinity values and those salinity values which are used for coastal salinity index calculations. So if we click on the box, the next thing we can do is download input data. This input data is that salinity data. So basically, we'll provide monthly salinity data that's used for the CSI calculations here. So you can download the zip file, which will contain metadata and monthly salinity data for the period of record for that site. I'm not going to open that up, but you can also download the CSI output data. This is the 1 to 24 month CSI values for that gauge, the output data. Finally, you can click on View CSI Graphs. And what happens here is you click on it and up pops the CSI stat graph for this gauge. And you can choose also the stat graph or 1 to 24 month intervals to view from this web page. So here's the two month CSI shown over time. Once again, you can look at it and see that there's droughts in the early 2000s and 2012 time period and a couple of wet periods also. So that is the interactive map. Next, we'll go down to the table. This is an interactive table and it's user friendly. It shows all the information that's also available on that pop-up box. This is user friendly because it allows you to sort. You click these arrows and you can sort alphabetically. You can look for your state of interest. If you're interested in South Carolina gauges only, you click on that and up pops the South Carolina gauges. If you highlight anything in the table, it shows up on your icon on the map. You can also filter by agency. So here's the NIRS gauges in South Carolina. It's showing the 3 gauges for the NIRS. And once again, as I mentioned, you can download data, view the station page, or view the CSI graphs here. So next we will move on to the About the CSI page. And this page gives you the motivation and methods for why we developed the Coastal Salinity Index. So here's the motivation. You can open and close these information boxes by clicking on the headers. We have a CSI classification table shown here, if you're interested. Here's that cartoon of the stacked graph and a description of everything that's on the stacked graph to help you understand how to use it. Additionally, we have data disclaimers and contact information for questions concerning the CSI or the R package that's used to calculate the CSI or problems with the website. Next, we'll move on to the additional real-time data page. And here we have a paragraph up top describing the additional data that's available. When creating the CSI website, we held webinars and collected survey information to determine what additional parameters potential users were interested in. They suggested temperature, water level elevation, and discharge, in addition to the salinity. Timing and funding constraints only allowed us to include salinity, temperature, and gauge height. We'll get into that in a moment. So here's the interactive map for this additional data page. You can change the background, of course, similar to the landing page. Over here on the right is the explanation, and it shows you the parameters you can choose. You can choose salinity, water temperature, and gauge height. You can choose average salinity or change in salinity. So this shows the average and change over a certain time period. The time periods of choice we chose to be 7 days, 14 days, 1, 2, and 3 months. Beneath that, we have this legend showing the color code for all those data that's on the map, and the range and the units. Beneath that, of course, the operating agencies are listed also. So here on the map, we're seeing 7-day average salinity over time, 7-day average salinity. If we want to see a 7-day change in water temperature, you choose that. And what happens is we get arrows on the map showing increasing or decreasing water temperature over the past 7 days. So we can see predominantly water temperature is dropping over the past 7 days. Finally, gauge height. Here's our distribution of gauge height data for the Coastal Salinity Index site. Now, for water level, we use gauge height at the individual gauges. Ideally, all the gauges would be a water level elevation tied to a common datum. This currently isn't the case. We didn't have a common datum for all the gauge data that we had, and we didn't have time to evaluate all the gauges and metadata and convert to a common datum. So we went with gauge height, which is a term that's used by the USGS for a lot of their gauges. In addition, we didn't have time to go through the NIDIS gauges, so we're only including on the website currently USGS gauges and National Park Service gauges. And hopefully we'll be able to update the NIDIS gauges in the future. So basically you can look at this. This is gauge height in average percentile. So you can look at the gauges and compare them to one another to see which gauges are in the 25th, the 75th percentile, or what we would call normal, and which are outside of that, whether higher or lower than that. So that's gauge height for you. Next, what we'll do is we'll zoom into a station of interest. We'll go back to the St. Pierre gauge. Once again, here's the data that's available. You can see average salinity for the 7-day average is 23 PSUs. You can access the input data by clicking there. Next, we'll move to the time series graphs that we have available. Here's the 7-day. Let's see, here's a 7-day average salinity graph for you for the previous 3 years. The black line in the background is showing daily salinity data in practical salinity units. That's the raw data from the agency that we're plotting. And then we're doing the 7-day average, which is shown in green here. So 7-day average, you can change it to a 14-day average, and that'll change for you. Additionally, you can change your parameter, salinity, water temperature, or gauge height. So we'll switch it to water temperature. plot water temperature for the past 3 years. And you could also do it for the full period of record by selecting that. And you can zoom in to areas of interest on the graphs if you wish, just using the clicker. And you can change sites also if you're interested. So that is that time series graph. Next, we'll do the 30-day moving window average graph. This is just a quick way to view your salinity data or temperature data. It's showing a 30-day average, running average of salinity over time. The gray line in the background is the daily values. The black line is the 30-day average over time. And the color bands in the background are the percentile classes for the period of record. It's monthly percentile classes, which are repeated over time. So you can view your salinity data for different times of year and see whether or not it's normal range, which is the 25 to 75th percentile, shown in green. If it's above normal, it's in the dark blue. If it's below normal, it's in the dark brown. So that's the 30-day moving window average graph. And finally, you can view the CSI graphs again from this tab if you're interested. So you click on that and up pops the CSI stack graph, and you can choose all the different intervals of interest. So that is the additional data page. And lastly, we'll move to the resources page. So the resources page is basically links to the CSI R package located on GitHub. It includes links to published data, reports, and presentations related to the CSI. And finally, we acknowledge our partners on this website here. And that is all I have for the website preview.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. I am now going to, sorry, there we go. Okay, now we're really excited to take all of this information, this whirlwind tour of a fantastic, interactive, user-friendly website, and get a taste of how you can apply this in real-life scenarios related to research and understanding the ecosystems that we manage and protect. And so we'll start first with Andrew Twol, again from South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thanks, Meredith. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, perfect.
All right. Yeah, so I'm Andrew Twol. I'm with the Environmental Research Section here at the Marine Resources Research Institute at the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources in Charleston. I'm going to give a brief overview of some proposed work to explore linkages between the Coastal Salinity Index and several ecological data sets that we have here for the ACE Basin in South Carolina. Next slide, please. Just because I know there's a more regional audience here, in case you're not familiar with the area, this is the kind of southern half of coastal South Carolina with Charleston at the top. You can see the kind of urbanized area there. Next slide, please. Here is approximately the location of the ACE Basin National Estuary Research Reserve. So this area is kind of represents a really nice study area in that it encompasses a pretty nice environmental gradient. It's fed freshwater primarily by the Blackwater Edisto River, but also receives freshwater input from the Ashpoo and Combahee rivers, thus forming the acronym ACE Basin. This area is also characterized, compared to the Gulf Coast, as an area that has a relatively large tidal range, so 2 to 3 meters in this part of the state. And so then kind of the area enclosed by the box encompasses a salinity gradient really ranging from full seawater to freshwater conditions. Next slide, please. Also within the ACE Basin exists a network of 6 long-term water quality monitoring stations. Next slide, please. So just zooming in on those, again, these are maintained by the Ace Basin National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is operated out of our agency. There are 6 active sites along this gradient with a very nice salinity gradient that I mentioned. 4 of these sites have a period of record of over 19 years, one of them to 26 years. 2 of them were more recently established in 2015. So this graph just illustrates this is actually just coincidentally the same site highlighted by Matt just a few minutes ago. So you can see within this period of record, it does capture several nice dry and wet periods, most notably late 2012 drought, as well as several periods of very high freshwater inputs. Next slide, please. So in terms of other environmental data sets, through our group here, we run what we call the CCAP, or the South Carolina Estuarine and Coastal Assessment Program. This is an environmental quality monitoring program. It's actually modeled after the EPA's National Coastal Condition Assessment. So the goal of this program is really to compile broad ecological health metrics. This particular program has been running continuously since 1999, and it includes metrics ranging from water quality and sediment contaminants, benthic and vertebrate community, as well as the benthic index of biotic integrity. So we're well equipped to kind of examine ecological health and kind of relate that back to some of these other data sets. We also collect data using trawl sampling to explore the nekton community. This, in this case, is typically comprised of juvenile fish and vertebrates like shrimp and crabs. We also compile these into kind of overall health indices. And you can see on the lower right there is all the sites we've sampled over the years. So we've got a really nice spatial coverage. In this case, the different colors there just are very basic level of scoring sites as for poor, fair, or good. Next slide, please. Also within the Ace Basin exists a network of sediment elevation tables. These were established by the South Carolina Geological Survey, which is a group within the South Carolina DNR. These began in 1999. So again, a really nice long-term data set here. Currently, there's only 12 active stations. Some of these stations were lost to erosion. So I think we can still explore these. They just won't have coverage for the entire period of record to line up with the water quality stations. These particular stations are monitored quarterly using the elevation pins to kind of capture the surface processes, but also periodically using high precision or RTK GPS to capture deeper kind of geological processes. Next slide, please. So like I said, we're kind of proposing to explore some linkages between these various data sets. We will calculate the CSI for the most recent data at all those sites, as well as for stations where this wasn't previously available. We will link the set data to the most proximal Coastal Salinity Index station. We'll also take our benthic and other estuarine habitat quality data, group these by site type and sub-watersheds to develop an annual data set for several areas, but we'll also explore sites quality in relationship to CSI on an individual site basis. In terms of analysis methods, we'll use kind of a standard regression-based analysis approach, but we'll explore this kind of in a multivariate context, and we'll also use varying lags to capture any kind of differences in ecological or environmental response that may exist. We'll also do some more community-based analysis, specifically primer, if you're familiar with that, to kind of explore some of the broader relationships that might exist. And then we'll look, also at spatial variability in the CSI and some of these other variables between the different sites, looking at relationships to riverine inflows and also local precipitation patterns. And so that's it. I'm happy to take any questions as appropriate and time permits.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew. We'll now shift over to the Gulf of Mexico to Chris Swarzynski. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, hi everyone. I am going to talk a bit how we might apply the Coastal Salinity Index to understanding wetland plant community dynamics in the Mississippi River Delta Plain. And we will use a very good database, Coastal Reference Monitoring Program, and which has about 400 stations with vegetation, salinity, water levels, and this will lend itself very much to this kind of analysis to understand when plant communities shift from one characteristic to another one. Next slide, please. So the reason to want to understand this is because the soils are affected by the type of plants that are out there. And in this one example, we have soils, and the two soils are really different. But if you look at long-term averages, the salinities in the soil are quite similar. Next. Where they differ is how they respond to extreme events. A drought in 2000, this was almost a one-year-long drought, and the lower picture, the marsh with the different vegetation, the soil is compromised. The upper one did not respond to that extreme event, even though it was only a few miles away. One more, next. And a hurricane, the same story. The hurricane affected one, but not the other. So what we want to try to do is use the CSI to see if we can understand when the soil or when the plant community shifts from one to the other, and try to prevent that if there's any actions that can be taken. Next slide. So one of the first things to look at is a long-term variability, and CSI is a really good visualization of what's going on. We have here over 30 years of salinity data daily, and if you look at it and if you combine it with some stats, this from 1955 to 1990, this particular station with an intermediate marsh was getting more and more salty with more extremes and more frequent salinities. And Kendall Tower, the Man-Kendall shows that that was significant in the October-November months. So, we might think that this is going to be a problem. It's just going to get worse, and eventually the intermediate marsh will shift to a more brackish system with a poorer soil quality. Next slide. But in fact, the opposite happened. We had one more big drought in 2000, and after that, for the next 20 years, that intermediate area has just freshened up, and the last 5 years, it's more reflective of a freshwater system, so with a different kind of soil. And if we look at the Man-Kendall statistic, we see that significant freshening several months, 5 out of the 12 months. So the CSI really is a great example of a visualization of what we can see, and we don't even need much more for stats. Next slide. So what we look for, what we want to do with this CRIMS data set is look for thresholds, and we have the monthly and the 12-month CSI, and they differ a little bit, but the 1 month picks up droughts really well. It picks up hurricanes. It picks up in 2010 we had a big oil spill, and they opened up freshwater diversions, and in the hope of keeping the oil from entering the estuaries, and so that shows up as a dark blue, very, very fresh period. And the green line is the toggle between an intermediate community, or between a brackish community and an intermediate community. And you can see that both in the 1 month and the 12-month CSI, there's a period in 2000 when the salinity has exceeded that 5 parts per thousand threshold. If we look at the 12-month, the whole thing moderates a bit and shifts to the right or to later in time, but it still has a very big impact, and we don't see the hurricanes anymore. But the oil spill, the freshwater diversion of river water is much more is bigger. More visible. So this is a way of using the CSI to visualize what's affecting that particular area where the gauge is. Next slide. So the biology, of course, depends on whether you can get away or you're like a fish, or if you're a plant or a shellfish and you can't really move. And this, I just want to show how the 1 month, 12 month, and 24 month moderate. The more you take the running average, the longer running average, the less acute the salinity peak is. But it shows that it extends for a longer period, and the biology might respond to a 1 month acute event or a 12-month chronic event. And so the CSI allows us to look at that, the differences. Next slide. One other way of looking at this is when you combine it with river inflow. This is the Nueces estuary in Texas. And these are two gauges, one in the more freshwater upper parts of the estuary, and the green dotted lines are those thresholds between intermediate brackish and salt marshes. And on the top is the monthly averaged inflow of the Nueces River at Calilan. And you can see that the estuaries don't respond. They kind of respond, but the higher flows in the early part of 99 to 2008 affected the lower part of the estuary more. And the lack of freshwater inflow affected the upper estuary significantly in 2009 and 2014. So when you combine the CSI, the visualization, and you understand a bit about the biology or know some of the thresholds, you can combine everything into a pretty good visualization of what's going on. And this is one part of the CSI that I find very useful. And then you can use stats again, the descent slope, to see whether there's any significant freshenings or not. So it's not a standalone, it's a combination. And the last slide, I think, this is another part that I really like, is for the Gulf of Mexico, I can look at 20 years worth of data from Texas to the Florida Panhandle and then to the Florida south near Fort Myers. And we can see which areas, some areas have experienced a tremendous drought in 2000 at the beginning significantly. Almost the entire Gulf freshened up in the last 2 years, 2018, 2019. And then in Alabama, there's a little shift, or there's a more pronounced drought in Alabama and then the Panhandle in 2009, I think that is. Whereas if you go all the way to the Everglades, the lower graph on the right side, that one actually has a more similar signature to the Mississippi Sound and to Louisiana. So again, this is one really nice tool to visualize what's happening in a big regional area, and it's really useful to understand and to guide people into what they're looking for, to understand maybe the biology data that they're working with. And that's I'll leave it at that for now. But like Andrew, I'll take questions at the right moment.
Thank you so much, Chris. A reminder, if anybody has questions, please put it in the question box. We're now going to pass it over to our last panelist, which is Simeon Urich. Simeon, I went ahead and shared with you control. Do you have it?
I do. Can you hear me?
I do. It is on note setting.
Okay. Let me try this again. Can you, how do you unshare?
I can take it back.
Yeah, take.
Sure.
Sorry about that. I clicked the wrong. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, let's try it again.
Excellent.
Still notes?
Yeah, can you go up to your display settings? Do you see
Sure.
that? That's good.
Okay, so are you seeing a picture of me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you, Meredith, for coordinating the webinar. I'd like to thank the collaborators on this project. I'd also like to note that much of the work here is preliminary. In this talk, I'm going to present recent research that we're developing for the CSI. The objectives are to complement ongoing stream flow analyses of the U.S. water mission area, such as identifying flow regime characteristics and extreme events. We'd like to develop spatial mapping of estuaries to compare with existing terrestrial mapping, such as the U.S. Drought Monitor, and we'd like to work directly with natural resource managers to apply these in a decision-making context. We're focusing on oyster reefs, which are important geomorphic features that can alter hydrology by channeling, diverting, or impounding water flows in estuaries. For that reason, they may play a key ecological role in regulating local salinity regimes. At the same time, oysters are also impacted by changes in salinity through physiology and stress. So there's a feedback between landscape geomorphology and the oyster reef dynamics. This relationship is hypothesized for reefs in Swanee Sound on the Gulf Coast of Florida, which is shown in the photos here. And large-scale restorations such as Lone Cabbage Reef shown on the left may be effective tools for managing estuarine habitat. We're developing integrated modeling to understand how reef systems are adapted to hydrodynamic interactions. This will help to quantify ecosystem services of oyster reefs, in particular regulation of salinity regime and other physical inputs. And this can be at the larger spatial scale of ecosystems. So this modeling also supports decision-making for living shoreline restorations, which I've shown in the bottom left, for managing fish and wildlife, such as the American oyster catcher on the bottom right. And it's also relevant to other important geomorphic features, such as coral reefs and barrier islands. This slide shows long-term monitoring locations for coastal salinity in the left panel and freshwater stream flow in the Swanee watershed, shown in yellow in the right panel. We further developed the CSI to calculate stream flow anomalies using continuous monitoring data from the USGS National Water Information System, NWIS. In the next few slides, I'll show CSI results for approximately 100 salinity stations and for stream flow in the 4 major river basins at locations marked by the black dots on the right. And this allows for comparison of the estuarine salinity regime to terrestrial watershed dynamics. So here's the CSI applied to stream flow for the 4 major basins in the Swanee watershed. This is the 12-month time scale. Here I've graphed the CSI so that dark blue upward indicates flooding and dark red downward indicates drought. Note that there are periods of large swings in the CSI throughout the record. However, the last 2 decades show an increasing trend of drought, higher intensity, longer durations, particularly in the Santa Fe Basin in the bottom panel on the right. This figure ties together climatology with the CSI calculations. Top panel shows the multivariate El Nino Southern Oscillation Index, or ENSO. Middle panel shows the CSI applied to the NWIS stream flow. And the bottom panel shows the CSI across 94 salinity monitoring stations in Swanee Sound. So there are some clear connections between atmospheric oscillations, stream flow, and salinity, which you can see by following areas of dark blue and red vertically across these panels. For example, the severe El Nino in 1997-98 produced high flooding and freshwater in the estuary in dark blue. Following that, there was extensive drought from 2000 to 2002, as well as in 2007, 2011, and 2012. So these alternations between high flooding and high drought, creating a noisy salinity regime, are conditions that we're concerned with from the ecological perspective. This slide shows the same information as maps spatially across the estuary. El Nino and drought are shown in the left and middle panels, and the right panel shows a transition period for 2011 where drought's beginning to express along the mouth of the river. The biological implications are habitats in the drought zone may be shifting to less suitable for estuarine species, and areas of high quality habitat may be compressing spatially. For highly mobile species that use the estuary for nursery or foraging, The total area of available habitat may change spatially through time, which impacts their foraging behaviors and decision making. A quick example is the threatened Gulf sturgeon, which USGS WARC is monitoring in Swanee Sound. These figures show preliminary sturgeon monitoring data for 3 different months that have varying flow and salinity conditions. That's not enough data to make any solid conclusions, but the telemetry does show spatial variation in use of the estuary for different conditions of flow and salinity. So more to come on this. So I'll just wrap up now by saying we're developing integrated modeling across hydrology, geomorphology, and ecology, which includes terrestrial and estuarine linkages. We're extending this to quantify extreme events in both the terrestrial watershed and the estuary, and to interpret this for biological species of interest. Applications range from developing real-time early warning reporting to convey to managers, work directly with managers in a decision analysis or spatial conservation planning context based on summary metrics such as duration, intensity, and spatial extent of extreme conditions. So I'll leave it there and we can move on to questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Simeon. Before we go to questions, Matt is going to just provide a very brief overview of next steps and future plans for the CSI. Matt?
Yes, yep. So I'm going to give a brief overview. We can move on to the next slide. What the next steps are. So the CSI team does hope to expand our CSI network out to the West Coast and add additional gauges where we have data gaps. That work's going to require collaboration with entities interested in partnering with us to collate that data, QA it, and incorporate it into our data stream. We currently don't have any funding to do that, but look forward to talking to folks regarding that opportunity. As presented today, the USGS is working on case studies to see how well the CSI can be used for ecological linkages and decision making. In addition, our team is beginning to work with the USGS Water Availability Impacts of Extreme Events Program to see if the CSI data sets can be used to help delineate short to long-term impacts of hurricanes to water quality and then therefore water availability in coastal areas. And finally, a new USGS Community for Data Integration project has allowed the incorporation of the CSI into a new web tool. I'm collaborating with the USGS Florida Water Science Center on this project. I'll describe this tool on the next page. So here's a quick overview of the Coastal Data and Analysis tool for water resources management. This is a new website which is being created to aid coastal water resources management. The prototype website combines groundwater, surface water, water quality data into one website. So it includes flow and water level and salinity or chloride, and then it also consolidates data from multiple agencies. The websites generally have the same map footprint as the Coastal Salinity Index website. It'll be an interactive map with interactive tables to view the various gauge data. Finally, the website will allow viewing statistical analyses, trend analyses, and graphs of the data. This will include CSI graphs that'll be distributed on this website. This website's currently being developed and should be available in the spring of 2022. Next slide. And thank you. Here's links to the CSI website, the CSI R package, and other resources. Feel free after the call or whenever to reach out to me and the team if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Matt. We don't have a lot of time, but we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. Feel free to stick around if you're able to. I invite all of our panelists to come back and join us. And let's go ahead and get started. So the first question we have, and I'll direct this one starting with Matt. There are U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service refuges on the coast. Why are these gauges not used?
Oh, sure. Yep. So the funding, initially we started with 17 gauges, then we got a little pot of money to fund this additional work. We evaluated what gauge data was out there. We had to go to agencies that had real-time data available and that were easily accessible. And ultimately, we had to just stop at 3 agencies for that. So if there's additional agency data that's out there, we definitely are taking inventory of those, and hopefully we'll be able to incorporate that into the future.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. The next question, I think you already answered it, asked, when will you begin expanding the CSI to the West Coast? As you mentioned, there currently are no resources, but you are certainly open and very excited about that opportunity. In particular, if there are partners we can work with to incorporate the right data. So you can follow up with Matt on that. The next question, and this is for a full group, and I also want to mention we have a few extra panelists joining us, Kirsten Lackstrom, Andrea Medenblick, and Brian McClowski, who worked really hard for many years in developing the CSI. So anyone is welcome to answer these questions. This one is for the full group. Except for making a comparison between sites, can you give an example of how using the CSI is better than using absolute values of salinity?
This is Brian McCloskey. I can hop in here.
Great, go ahead, Brian.
Okay. It also allows the comparison across time because it standardizes the, if January is always drier than June, then the January CSI will be relative to other Januaries and will be directly comparable to the June CSI that's related to other Junes.
Great, thank you.
Hi, this is Simeon. I'll just jump in real quick. I view using them side by side in comparison, looking at both the absolute. So you could think of it as absolute on one graph and CSI on the other axis. And the reason why is that a lot of estuarine ecologies adapted to these intermediate salinity conditions, adapted to a lot of fluctuation. So as Brian said, the CSI shows how a location is varying with respect to itself, and that might be something that a community is adapted to or acclimated to. So you can see variation in a community, which may include a lot of noise and salinity to begin with, and not a lot of the extremes.
Excellent. Any other panelists like to respond?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think also, this is Andrew here. In an ecological sense, I think it's important to integrate over longer time scales, which this I'm hopeful will allow doing that. Some of the water quality sites here might vary by 10 parts salinity or more twice a day with the tides. So I think integrating, in a longer term sense across that for things like vegetation or other biological responses will be important and really kind of teasing out some of those relationships.
Great, thank you. This next question I'm going to direct to Simeon. When applied to stream flow, are gamma distributions still used to scale the index?
The answer to that is it's a different distribution, and I believe it is a gamma distribution. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but I did make changes to the scripts. And if anyone's interested in applying to stream flow, please get in touch, and I'll share with you the scripts that I can point exactly where I've changed them.
Great. Simeon, I'm going to keep you here. How did you calculate the CSI for inflow as done on the Suwannee and tributaries?
Inflow, I'm interpreting that to mean stream flow. So I think this is the same question as before. And please get in touch. I'll give you more details, and happy to have a phone call if you're interested.
Great. And we can follow up directly with everyone who's asking these questions as well. Here's a question for Matt, and I think we know the answer. Can a new gauge be added? I guess my suggestion would be just to reach out to you and your team. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep. Definitely. We're going to talk to our USGS colleagues and who are interested in other sites and have them help us do the legwork to incorporate new gauges. So yeah, we're hoping to be able to do that. On a gauge by gauge basis, to get more gauges from other agencies will take a bigger effort, of course. So yeah, just reach out, please.
Excellent. And then as mentioned before, there are data requirements in order for those gauges to be added, real time, long length of record, etc. Next question, does the site have an app to calculate PSU from conductivity at low conductivities?
I'll jump in here again. This is Brian again. I don't think that the site has that. The R package for the CSI package has a function that allows you to calculate PSU from specific conductance. I don't know what you mean by low conductivities. It does not have an arbitrary cutoff. I mean, it uses the same formula for any conductance, but if it's a reasonable conductance, it'll calculate the PSU from that. And the ones we have on in the network go to pretty low PSUs.
Great, thanks, Brian. This question, I think I'm going to start with, this will be for Matt and Brian probably. You mentioned that you're not providing raw data and you explained why. Might you one day provide the raw data, as some of us are allergic to averaging?
Right.
Yeah, I'll just leave it.
So in working with NIRS and the National Park Service, they asked that we not provide the raw data. You know, they need to handle the data and review it and QA it and provide it. And some, you know, every now and then the data is updated and they update it on the website. So that's why we've kind of stayed away from serving up the raw data for that reason.
We do provide links to the raw data though, wherever it's possible.
That's right. Yep. You can go to the originating agency to get that data. It didn't work today in today's click, but today, if you just click on view originating agency data, it'll take you to their webpage.
Great. I see we're after the hour. I'm going to take a couple of quick questions and then we'll wrap this up for those of you who are still sticking around. We won't be able to get to all of those questions, but again, we will respond to you individually if needed.
Meredith, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just quick response to that one. I'm also allergic to averaging and I laughed out loud when I read that. I've been working to average at biweekly and weekly scales, so new codes for that, if you'd like to discuss that. I think it really requires deciding what's the important ecological unit that you're interested in. If you get down to 2 fine scale, it starts to become meaningless because it's just a super noisy index.
Thank you, exactly. Okay, last 2 questions. How frequently do gauges in the network report conductivity and temperature?
Okay, so the data from the originating agencies, you know, so it's real time. So a lot of those are, you know, 6-minute or 15-minute intervals. You'd have to go to the originating agencies to get to that data. So 6-minute intervals, I think for the National Park Service gauges, if I remember, you know, about 15-minute for a lot of the USGS gauges, but it could vary.
And if you mean the number of gauges, Matt, you can correct me here, I'm spitballing a bit. I believe about 50% of the USGS gauges are conductance and the other half are salinity. And I think all of the NIRS and NPS gauges are salinity. And I'd say about 90% of the gauges in the network have temperature records.
Great, excellent. And last question, do we have a Coastal Salinity Index after Hurricane Ida for Gulf of Mexico stations?
That's a great question. When we launched the website, a hurricane came through and knocked out one of the NIRS gauges for a little while, so we had to drop it from the site for a little while. I've looked recently, and yes, after Ida came through, some of the gauges did drop for real-time data. It's still available on the website, but it just might not be up to date. But when a gauge is hit by a hurricane, we can only put it back on the website when that data returns in our data stream.
The realities of field work. Anyways, I would like to go ahead and thank you for so many people. We still have over 90 people still with us right now. Just a reminder, when this ends, please take our short survey to help us with the Coastal Salinity Index. The recording will be made available. It will be sent out to all who registered, as well as being posted on the US Drought portal, drought.gov. And we will include in that outreach our speaker contact information as well as the website for Coastal Salinity Index. Once again, thank you, Andrea, for posting the webpage. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. And please don't hesitate to reach out to these presenters if you have any additional questions or feedback on the Coastal Salinity Index. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.